Daf Pei Vav Amud Aleph, 5 lines from the top. Continuing on with the discussion, Rav's halacha that he said that the rooftops, the gagen, were not niskadesh. Therefore, a person could not eat the korban pesach on the rooftops of the houses of Yerushalayim. Tashma, let's bring a raya from the Brisa Kasha the Rav. Zok the Brisa Abishol Oimer Aliyas Beis Kodesh Kadoshim Chamura Mi Beis Kodesh Kadoshim. He said the upper level of the Kodesh Kadoshim was even more chomer. The Kedusha was even more chomer than that of the Kodesh Kadoshim itself. Why is that? Shebeis Kodesh Kadoshim Kohen Gadol Nirtzach Loi Pamach B'Shana. Because into the Kodesh Kadoshim, the Kohen Gadol would go on Yom Kippur. He would go on the day of Yom Kippur 4 times. He would go on the day of Yom Kippur, but it's only 1 time during the year. V'aliyas Beis Kodesh Kadoshim, where as far as the aliyah goes, the upper level ein nichnason lo ela pamach b'shavua, was only once in 7 years. V'am lo pamayim b'shavua, some say twice in 7 years. V'am lo pamach b'yovel, and some say once every 50 years. Leda ma'itzricha, only to inspect it and to do repairs if it was necessary. So you see that it was so kodesh that they only entered it so infrequently, much less frequently than the Kodesh Kadoshim itself. So you see, nevertheless, that the Aliyah was niskadesh. Rav's halacha was that the Gagen and the Aliyahs were not niskadesh. And you see over here that it was Amar of Yosef, Are you going to ask a kasha from Rav from the case of the Heichal? Rav didn't say his din by the Heichal. Shiny Heichel, the Heichel is different. Dirsiv, Vayiten Dov, L'Shleim Benoi, Es Tavenis Ulam, Es Tavenis Baltov, Vegan Zalkov, Val Yosef, Chador, Vapnimu, Besa Kaperas. Dovid Melech gave to Shleima, he gave the plans for all of these areas. So included in these areas is the Ulam and the Ali Yosef and the upper levels. And it says also the basic kaparas. And he said everything over here, all of these plans, this were from Yad Hashem. So you see that when we're discussing about the ulam, the heichal, the upper levels, all of that was given by the hand of Hashem, meaning that it was niskadesh. When Rav said that the Aliyahs and the Gagen were not niskadesh, he wasn't talking about the Kodesh Kadoshim, he wasn't talking about the Heichal, he wasn't talking about the Ulam, he was talking about the other areas. So Shema, let's bring a kasha from the following. If you have the lishkas, the rooms, the offices that were benuyas b'kodesh, if they were built in the area that was kodesh, but they were opened into the chol. Chol we don't mean over here to mean the chol mamish. We mean to mean the harabayas, but not the area of the azora. It was outside the azora, and it was open. It was built in the azora rather, but it was open. The opening was the entrance of it was from the area beyond the azora, from the Ezra's noshe. So these are the lishkos that they were built to have a b'kodesh v'psuchas l'chol, teichen chol, v'gagesem kodesh. We say that the interior is chol, is not considered to be part of the azora, it doesn't have the kedusha of the azora, but the rooftops are kodesh. So you see clearly that the rooftops have kedusha. During Rav Hofstedter answered, he's saying, kishagasem shavan l'karka azora. He says this is where we're talking where the gagas, the rooftops, are on the same elevation, the same level as the floor of the azora. Since they're at the same level as the floor of the azora, they're not considered to be rooftops. They're considered to be part of the azora, the floor of the azora. How is this? How does this work? The harabayas it's on a mountain, it's sloped. So as you got further from east to west, it sloped up. It went further up. So these lishkas that we're talking about over here, these chambers that we're talking about here, they were actually built under the floor of the azora. So therefore, the roof was the floor of the azora. So that's why it was kodesh, it was the floor of the azora. And now, when it was built and the opening of it, the elevation of the Ezra's Noshim was lower down. It sloped up. So therefore, when the entrance of it was on a lower level, was from the entrance to from the Azora. That's where it entered. But since it sloped up and there was 7.5 amas from a distance from the Azara, from the Ezras Noshim, from where the steps of the Ezras Noshim started, and you went up to the Ezras Yisrael. So therefore, what the entrance was on a lower level, on the lower level of the entrance, was then on the top of it was the roof of this lishka, but was actually the floor of the Ezras Yisrael. Since it sloped up, what is on an entrance lower down, when you entered in, but as you move and go on a slope up, the roof of it is the floor of the Ezras Yisrael. So really, therefore, it didn't have a halacha of a gag, it had halacha of a ritzvah, of the floor of the Zohar. So we say, therefore, that the interior of it is chol because the opening is from the Ezras Noshim. The opening of it is from, and the interior is defined by where the opening is. The opening is from the outside of the Azara, so it has a din of outside the Azara. But the top of it is the floor of the Azara. If they were built in the area outside the Azara, but they were psuchas l'kodesh, the entrance is from the kodesh, toichen kodesh v'gagasem chol. The din is that the interior is considered kodesh because, again, since it's defined, the area is defined by where the opening is. Since it's open to the kodesh, the interior is therefore kodesh. V'gagasem chol, but the top of them is chol. Now, if you tell me if you're telling me that the case in the Brisa is that where the rooftops of it is shavan l'karka zara, is level with the floor of the Zora, well, in this case, then what we must be dealing with? We must be dealing with havelei mechilas. This scenario is only if these are tunnels. So there are tunnels that, therefore, they're tunnels that were opened through from the Kodesh. They're accessed through stairways in the Azora, but then they're tunnels that go underground, and they're built into the area of the Ezras Noshim. So if that's the case, what we're dealing with is therefore tunnels that were built underneath the area of the Azora. Well, if that's the case, so they're mechilas. V'amar Rav Yochanan mechilas lo niskachu. Rav Yochanan said the tunnels that were underneath the floor of the Azora didn't have kedusha. So how can you tell me over here that Teichen is kodesh? How can you tell me that the interior is kodesh? The tunnels. The Gemara answers, Kikam Rav Yochanan. Where did he say that the tunnels are not niskadesh but psuchos l'harabayis? That's only when the opening is opening to the harabayis and not the Azora. B'ki Tanya he, when the Mishnah said that it is kodesh b'psuchos l'Azora, like we said that the entrance is from the Azora, and therefore, since it is access. The entrance is from the Azora, it has a kedusha of the Azora. Correct, the Gemara, Tanya, how can you say that? We learned in the Brisa of Yudah, Mechilas mitachas lahechal chol. He says that the tunnels under the hechal were chol. Now, if they're under the hechal, you would say that they're open. The opening is to the Azora. If you're talking that they're under the hechal, then l'chayra it was opened to the Azara, and you see over here that even if the opening is to the Azara, it's still considered a chol. Gemara says no, that's not the case. Ki tanya hi b'psuchas l'chol. That's referring to when the opening is chol. So, for instance, if you have at the end of the heichal, then there's only 11 almas between the back and the Kaisel Ma'aravi. So if there was a tunnel that led from underneath and through the back area, through the Kaisel Ma'aravi, through the western wall, and was opened up to the area behind there, then you would have a case where it's open to the Harabais and it's not open to the Azor, and therefore it's not Kaddish. Tashma, Akasha from the following. It says V'gagai Kaddish, the rooftop of the Heichal was Kaddish. So you see, clearly it says it's Kaddish. Now as Rashi points out, you can't tell me, well, this is the Heichal, and therefore it's different because the Pasuk says that it says Kol V'ksav Alai, that it was given from Hashem, Kol V'ksav Yad Hashem Alai, his skill. Because Rashi explained, because over there the pasuk only says the Tavnis Ulam Vesbatav, and it says Ali Yosef. It doesn't say the Gagais. So therefore, if Rav said that the rooftops doesn't have Kaddish, that should therefore mean even the Gag of the Heichal. The Aliyah is you can be machalik that way, but not by the Gag. So Gemara says V'tizbra. Is this really a kasha? It says that Gagin allow these rooftops. It says you can't eat the kachim there, you can't shech the kachim, so apparently it does not have the kedusha of the heichal. So but it says Gagin Kaidish, so what does that mean? So Amar Rav Chama Bar Guri, it means to say Lo'isen Shtei Amas. It means to say that they used to place the measuring sticks. The kelim of the Beis Mikdash, they used to put them and store them in a makom that was kaddish. So it has a certain level of kedusha. It doesn't have kedusha gemura, but it has a certain level of kedusha. Now, as Faisus points out, there's no chiyuv to put them in a makom kaddish, but for the cover of the scale, they put it in an area that had more kedusha than other areas. So what it means to say is that these gagin has an element, a level of kedusha, but not the kedusha of the Azor itself, not the kedusha of the Ulam and Heichal itself. Therefore, you can't shech kachim there. You can't shech kachim kalim there. You can't eat kachim there either. It just means it's a level of kedusha. Loisim shtei amas, like we find by these two measuring sticks. This nan that we learned shtei amas hayibishushan abir. There was a room that they used to store things in the Beis Hamikdash. It had a design of Shushan Abira. The Persians gave them permission, Klal Yisrael, to go up and build a Beis Hamikdash, but they wanted to remind them where they came from, so they had a tzura, a design of Shushan Abira. So that was the structure that was built on top of the shar, on the gateway, on the shar HaMizrachi. And they used to have these measuring sticks over there, which measures an amma. Shtei amas hayu b'shushan abira. Achas al keren mizrach tzvainim. One was kept in the north, in the keren mizrach tzvainim, it's the northeast corner. V'achas al keren mizrach stromis, and one on the southeast corner. Zu she'al gabe mizrach tzvainim is the one that was in the northeast corner. Haisi Yisrael al shel Moshe chatzi ha'etzba. It was larger than the measuring stick of Moshe Rabbeinu, of the Hamavachatzi, a half a finger. It was that much larger. V'zu al Keren Mizrach's Droimis, the one that was on the southeast corner, it was bigger than the other one, also by half an espa. Nimsas Yaser al Shalmaish Etzba. So therefore, it was that one, the one that was on the southeast corner, was larger, was more than Moshe Rabbeinu's by a full etzba, full finger. Why do they have a bigger one and a smaller one? So why did they use ones that were larger than Moshe Rabbeinu's, and one of them was larger, and then slightly larger, and one was even larger, more than that? That the umnim, when they were hired to do a certain amount of work, so they were hired, for instance, to build a wall of 10 amas. Therefore, the obligation was to build a wall of 10 amas. However, so that was the standard amma. However, they were machzir b'gedola. When they measured out the amount of the length of the wall, or the height of the wall that they had to complete, they measured it with the larger stick. So the larger the ruler, that was an amma plus an etzba, which meant that the umnim were going to be paid based on, let's say in this example, 10 amas, but they actually had to produce a wall that was 10 amas plus 10 etzbois. So they actually had to do more and provide more than they were going to be paid for. Why is that? To ensure that they was accurate and they gave to hektish more than they were taking, so that they wouldn't be over on me'ilah. So why do we have two different sticks, two larger sticks? We understand why there was one larger ruler, to make sure that, be absolutely sure that they provided more, they provided at least as much as they're getting paid for. So we had provided a margin of error that to ensure that they did not provide less than they were paid for. But why two sticks? One was for gold and silver. We didn't want to be machmer on them so much when it came to gold and silver, because it was very expensive and the work was very difficult, and therefore we didn't want to impose that much of a chumrah on them. So that was only a half an etzba larger than the standard amma. But by building materials which were not as delicate and expensive and difficult, we imposed even a larger margin of error, that of a full etzba. I'll call upon him. What we're talking about over here is, when we say that they were kodesh, we meant just to store the kelim of the Beis Hamikdash. That we have a area gagim that had a certain level of kedusha, that we put the kelim there, but not to give it the full kedusha of the azara or the ulam nehechal. Tanan, we learned in Meshachal Loinus Vayva Lifnim. It says that the windows, so the ledges of the windows or the tops of the wall, are judged like the interior. So now, if we tell me that the gagin are not kodesh, how are we going to understand this? So bishlom achaloinus, we can understand the windows mishkach l'deshav l'karka azor. So you can tell me, like you said before, that it's shav l'karka azor. That we're talking about a ledge of a window, that it was the level to the gag of the azora, which had a higher elevation than the harabais. So therefore, it was from the perspective of the azara, it was level to the floor. So it's considered to be part of the floor. So it's a window in the wall that, from the vantage point of the azara, is level to the wall, to the floor rather. So therefore, it's considered to be the karka, the floor, which has kedusha. But so we can understand that it's level to the floor, and therefore it's not really considered to be a rooftop, it's considered to be a ritzvah. But however, the top of the wall, how are you going to have the top of the wall that's level to the floor of the azora? So more answers, you can find the case of the low wall. They had, next to the high wall, they had a supporting wall, a low wall. And this low wall was a very low wall, so it could be that it was a wall from the vantage point of the harabayas, but it was only at the height, of the floor of the azora. It says in the pasuk in Eicha that there was an avelus, and so to speak, it's as if the walls were crying. They were an avelus, they were mourning. So it says two types of walls. It says chel v'chayma. It means a high wall and a low wall. So there was a lower wall next to the higher wall, a supporting lower wall, which that could have the same elevation, the same height, because of the sloping of the higher elevation of the azora. That top of that wall could be actually level to the floor of the azora. Zok the Mishnah, Shtei Chaburas Shoyochlem B'Bayis Echad. If there were two Chaburas eating a Korban Pesach, one Korban Pesach in one house, so Rashi says the case is talking where there is a Chabura, they were nimnin, they registered on one Korban Pesach, and then they decided to split into two different groups. And our Tana holds that that's permitted, that it's permitted to split into separate groups and even eat it in different places. But of course, a Korban Pesach, a person cannot eat the Korban Pesach in two different places. So a person can't eat a Korban Pesach, part of it here, and then continue eating it somewhere else. But our Tana holds that even though they're Nimna on one Korban Pesach, they can split into two separate groups, and prior to starting to eating, they can separate into two groups and eat it in different places. So therefore, they each turn around and turn in a different direction, and they can eat the Korban Pesach. The reason that they turn in a different direction is not to give the appearance that they're eating in two different places. So they turn around and face in different directions, and they can eat it in the same house. And v'hamecham b'emsa, and even if they have the mecham, the kettle or the urn is in between them, so the shamas used to take the hot water, he would serve it or dilute the wine for each group, and even though the mecham is between them, they can keep the mecham between them. It's not a problem. It's not a problem that it looks like two different rooms or two different areas, because that's permitted, because this Tana holds that they can split up and they can eat in two different areas. So, and when the waiter comes to serve them and to pour the wine for them and to dilute the wine for them, however, he closes his mouth and when he turns around. Meaning, if you started to eat the Korban Pesach, he ate in one place, so he can't eat. Like we said, a person cannot eat the Korban in two different places. So if he ate in one place, therefore, what he has to do is he closes his mouth, and when after he eats, he closes his mouth. When he goes to the other area, he has to keep his mouth closed. So therefore, it doesn't look that he's eating here and going to eat there also. Until he returns to his chabur, his mouth has to be closed, and then he can eat. So he has to, so as not to give the appearance that he's eating in two different places, he eats in one place. When he serves the other group, he has to keep his mouth closed so that it doesn't appear like he's eating there also. The hakala, but we make a difference, an exception for hakala. Hakala, if hech says paneh v'yechelas. The kala, she can turn away from the group that she's in, and she can turn away. And when she eats, she doesn't have to be facing them. She can turn away, and when she eats, so the kala, she has tznius. Everybody is watching her and looking at her, so she doesn't want to be watched as she's eating. She can turn away, and then it's for her tznius and does not have to be facing them when she eats. Taisa says the kasha that this would be evident from the Reisha. What's the chiddush over here? The Reisha says that people who can they can eat, turn away, and eat in a different location. So what's the chiddush over here? If the kala, if she does not want to eat with these people, if she wants to turn away, what's the chiddush that she's permitted to do that? Taisa says what it means by the kala is even if she started eating with them, facing them, and now she feels uncomfortable, she can turn away from them and face a different direction, and it doesn't appear like she's eating the Korban Pesach in two different places. Now we allow this by a kala because of tznius, but otherwise a person who's eating with his chabura, then he should be facing them, and he should not turn away from them, because that gives an appearance like he's eating the Korban Pesach in two different locations.